Hello, welcome to Secure the Continent with me, Gbenga Aborowa. This is a show where we bring you all the latest security updates on the continent. But before we delve into today's topic, let me bring you the latest security headlines. Senegal's President and African Union Chairman Macky Sall holds negotiation talks with Vladimir Putin on Ukraine. Congo militiamen kill 18 civilians in a church. And South African locals attack undocumented foreigners in Gauteng province. Don't go anywhere, I'll be right back. Today on Secure the Continent, we will be looking at the Global Terrorism Index for the year in view, with our focus on Africa. The sub-Saharan regions of Africa emerged as the global epicenter of terrorism, even as global deaths decline and have accounted for about 48% of global terrorism deaths. We have more details for you in this package.
You see them? You see them?
For decades, terrorism has been one of Africa's biggest security challenges. Sub-Saharan Africa has borne the brunt of the violence, with international terrorist organizations founding splinter groups in the region. According to the latest Global Terrorism Index, Sub-Saharan Africa has become where terrorists thrive. In 2021, the region witnessed 48% of the total global deaths from terrorism. Of the 7,142 deaths that were recorded in the world, 3,461 happened in Sub-Saharan Africa. 4 of the 10 countries with the largest increase in the deaths from terrorism are Burkina Faso, Democratic Republic of Congo, Mali, and Niger, all countries in the Sub-Saharan African region. One area of the region has become a focal point in the fight against terrorism, and that is the Sahel. The Sahel has become a hiding place and launch area for terrorists. 43% of the deaths attributed to terrorist organizations like the Islamic State in West Africa, ISWA, Jama'at Nasr al-Islam wal-Muslimin, JNIM, Boko Haram, and Al-Shabaab were recorded in Sub-Saharan Africa. Between 2007 and 2021, the number of deaths due to terrorists increased by more than 1,000% in the region. However, there seems to be a glimmer of hope and some ray of light in the darkness. In 2021, Mozambique recorded the highest drop in deaths from terrorism, with 414 fewer deaths. Deaths have decreased by 82%, the highest global decline. This was achieved by Africa as the Rwandan government, Mozambican forces, and South African Development Community (SADC) stood together against the terrorist insurgency. This shows how Africa can fight its own demons. Nigeria also recorded a reduction in the number of deaths, with a 72% decline in deaths caused by Boko Haram between 2020 and 2021. Counterinsurgency efforts against Boko Haram have paid off. There is a battle on Sub-Saharan Africa's hands, and it is one that the region can win.
Now, joining me on Secure the Continent this evening to discuss this and more are Dr. Kabiru Adamu, a security analyst, and Dr. Wole Ojewale, a security analyst and expert on conflict, organized crime and security and governance in West Africa and Central Africa. And pretty much later, Kambale Musavuli, one of the leading political and cultural voices in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and the national spokesperson for the Center for Research in Congo, will be joining me. Gentlemen, a warm welcome to you both and welcome to Secure the Continent.
Thank you, Gbenga. Good evening.
Good evening to you.
Thank you so much, Gbenga. Good evening. Thank you, Doctor.
Now, I'd like to start with Dr. Adamu. Sub-Saharan Africa accounted for 48% of global terrorism deaths. That's almost half of all the deaths in the world, and Sub-Saharan Africa is a global epicenter of terrorism. Why is this so?
Based on the figures released by the report and its analysis, several factors ranging from governance, which allows terrorist groups to have influence. And I think that is the underlying word there, influence. The group also cited COVID-19 and the impact it had on governance, or the lack of capacity of governments to meet the needs of the various populations that they lead. That also created gaps that allowed these groups, terrorist groups, to exercise the kind of influence that allowed them to carry on. Then interestingly too, the report talked about political terrorism and how that is playing a role in Africa, as an example, Sub-Saharan Africa. And then lastly, the effect of climate change and the inability of governments as well as the corporate world to adapt to the effect and consequences of climate change. Now, even though the African continent is not a major contributor of the factors that lead to climate change, it has been a recipient of the consequences of climate change and the inability of governments to put in place adaptive measures to respond to these changes, unfortunately has created structural gaps that are being exploited by these terrorist groups. Now, if you look at the 4 countries where terrorism grew highest in the period, mind you, the index measures developments over 5 years. And so what it presented is an analysis of about five years. Now, within that period, countries like Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and the DRC, where we saw increments of that nature, have all seen these types of consequences, especially of climate change and the kind of structural gaps that were created by bad governance, as it were, and that allowed these groups to fester. And a factor which, although not clearly mentioned in the report, but is also important, is the existence of cells of these terror groups in Africa already. So as an example, we know that AQIM, Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, has existed for more than a decade, and that it has metamorphosed into several of these smaller groups that have pushed out to places like Burkina Faso as an example. And then if you look at the developments around Mozambique and DRC, these are also factions of the bigger groups that have always existed. So these are a combination of these factors that have led to the current state of terrorism in Sub-Saharan Africa.
Now, staying with you, Dr. Adamu, the Global Terrorism Index Report 2022 said the Islamic State in West Africa province is the most lethal group in the Sahel. In Niger, it was responsible for 23 attacks, killing on an average of 15.2 people per attack. Who are they? Who is this group? And what are the objectives?
So Islamic State in West Africa province is a group that broke out of the Jamaat al-Ahl Sunnah lil-Dawat wal Jihad, which is the major group that has been operating in the Lake Chad Basin area, and that was founded by Mamman Yusuf, that everybody calls Boko Haram. Now, in 2016, if I remember well, this group pledged allegiance to first initially to Al-Qaeda, that's how it started, and then later to the Islamic State. And then over time, the Islamic State removed its leader that died last year around May, that is Abubakar Shekau, and then appointed other leaders. And since then, we've seen several leaders emerging from the group at the moment. Now, what is the group trying to profess? By its name, it's suggesting it wants to carve out an Islamic caliphate within the Lake Chad area that would include parts of Nigeria, Niger, Chad, and to an extent, Cameroon. And so over this period, from 2014 up until now, we've seen the group attacking locations within these 4 countries that I've mentioned. Its headquarters appeared to be somewhere in the Lake Chad Basin, with at least, as far as we know, 4 protectorates, all of them involving regions from these 4 countries that I've mentioned earlier on, and that have at several points in time attempted to either attack security forces from these 4 countries or residents of these 4 countries. Now, this group, different from the parent group, which is
Boko Haram.
Wole Jihad or Boko Haram, in the manner that it associates with the general populace. Now, unlike the mother group, which is Boko Haram, which kills without making a differentiation in terms of who it is in the neighborhood, this group makes that differentiation. So its level of acceptance, and that is why I mentioned influence at the beginning.
Yes.
The GTI has mentioned influence as the most important factor in determining the ability of terrorist groups to propagate. And ISWAP has that advantage in the sense that it has, over time, been able to establish some form of influence and support from local populations where it exists, like I mentioned, in Nigeria, in Chad, in Cameroon, and to an extent in Niger.
Thank you very much, Dr. Adamu. I would like to bring in Dr. Ojewale here. Just a few days ago, 16 civilians were killed in Kebbi State. Last year, service chiefs were replaced, but there seems to be no let-off in incidences of insecurity. Our Super Tucano aircrafts are now in use, but why are we still having incessant attacks in the northwestern region of Nigeria? Why is it still vulnerable to attacks?
Thank you so much, Gbenga. I think the factors are many. And I will start on the note of the fact that the challenge that you mentioned about banditry in the northwestern part of Nigeria is asymmetrical warfare. In which case you do not, the enemy is hidden among the people that you are meant to protect. I'm talking in terms of the military operation. So it is not a clearly defined operation whereby you know
it's not conventional.
It's unconventional. You can't say the enemy is on that side, we are fighting on this side, and this is how we're going to map out our strategy. And then extant report has estimated that the population of the bandits across Zamfara, which has been the epicenter, Katsina, and some neighboring communities or states in that region, ranges between maybe 60 to 100,000 in terms of gangs, the population of the gangs that are perpetrating banditry in that region. And if you look at what our military has been able to do, or maybe in the course of the operations that they've carried out in the Northwest, you realize that what has come to the fore is the sophistication of this group. You've heard about high-level military equipment that have been, when they raided the forest, what is actually at the disposal of these bandits. So it makes it complicated when you have to battle an army of criminals that is ranging within 100,000 and sophisticated as having RPG, rocket launcher. So you know what you're dealing with in that regard. So I'm talking in terms of the composition in the first place and the sophistication. Yes. The second thing is the terrain where the military operation is going on. It's a very difficult terrain that is, you talk about forestry, you talk about mountains, you talk about vast expanse of ungoverned spaces where the military have to carry out operation. So those are some of the peculiar challenges that has made the banditry to linger until now. And then coupled with the fact that you now place this side by side other military operation that is going on in the country. You look at the northeastern part of the country where the military has actually been overstretched, as a lot of people have mentioned. You also look at incidents of agitation in the southeast where the military have had to respond. And then military is involved in all kind of regular policing operation, anti-kidnapping, ram robbery. The military is almost everywhere now.
So they're stretched.
So the military is overstretched in that regard. That is what I want to say. And then the last thing is that you have to place this side by side, the pervasive failure of governance in the land. Places that I mentioned, the impact of government is least felt because the moment the government loses the monopoly of violence to be able to install order, then you expect things to run amok. So I say this to undergird the fact that it's not that the military is not trying, But the challenges, the insecurity in Nigeria is just all over the places, and it becomes very difficult to be able to put a laser focus on a particular region and clear out that region. And then don't also forget, when you introduce this program, you were talking about the conflict in the Sahel. You know, some of these things that we're experiencing in the northwestern part of Nigeria are actually spilling over from the central Sahel.
They're interconnected.
Burkina Faso,
yes.
Mali, Niger Republic, where arms trafficking is like a free flow into the country. So this is the context in which military operation is taking place. I believe the Nigerian military are trying their best, but we do not have what it takes to be able to just take on these security dynamics all over the places that are going on almost everywhere in Nigeria now. If it is not kidnapping, it is ritual killing. If it is not militancy, it is agitation, Yoruba agitation, IPOB agitation, northeast, northwest. So the military cannot be heading everywhere. And then coupled with the fact that the police has not been able to live up to this responsibility of maintaining internal order.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ojewale. Quite serious security challenges all over the country. Now, back to you, Dr. Adamu. The events, like Dr. Ojewale just alluded to in Nigeria, is not isolated from what's happening in the neighboring, in our West African region. Now, Republic of Benin recorded its deadliest attacks yet when patrols in its W National Park struck improvised explosive devices. The government said 1 soldier and 8 pack officers were killed, including their French instructor, and 12 others wounded. Neighboring Togo has also suffered its first ever attack when assailants raided a security post in the northern border village of San Laoga on the 9th of November 2021. Is the terrorism in the Sahel spreading to otherwise safe havens? And what do you make of this new dimension?
The current narrative appears to show coastal areas around the west coast of Africa
yes.
as possible grounds for the expansion of these terrorist groups. Some narratives suggest that there is a strategic move by the terrorist groups to move into these areas because they need supplies, and that's one of the easiest ways to get these supplies. If they're able to capture a port, as an example, that would give them access to the vast oceans and, of course, across the world. Now, these are all theories, but suffice to say that irrespective of what the situation is, the breeding ground for terrorism exists in virtually all African countries. Perhaps apart from a few, like South Africa as an example. But in terms of
and what's the major cause of this breeding? What makes Africa so susceptible to terrorism and insecurity?
The low Human Development Index, grievances that are not being addressed, lack of democracy, issues around the poverty and illiteracy levels, and of course the suppression of the rights of individuals within those countries to express and speak themselves. We cannot isolate the possibility too of international influence by, sometimes African countries have become playgrounds of superpowers. So sometimes you see France and even the US or even Russia and the Western world, and perhaps even China. Sometimes all of this play a role and have made African countries, unfortunately, vulnerable and susceptible to manipulation. And of course, the resultant effect is structural defects that allow both terrorism and conflict to thrive.
Now, Dr. Adamu, in the recent past, France announced its withdrawal from Mali, and other European partners have announced a gradual withdrawal. Will this leave a security vacuum in Mali and also the fight against Islamist insurgency in the Sahel? How big of a blow is this? And we do understand that the Russian mercenary group, Wagner, is in Mali, contracted by the Malian government. Will this fill in the void? And where does this leave Mali in the general picture of the fight against its insurgency in the Sahel?
So I can give you the pedestrian response by saying yes, but then it's a little bit more complex than that, in the sense that France has been in this region implementing Operation Barricade with at least 4,000 soldiers until it increased that size to about 5,000 about a year ago, 2 years ago. Despite the successes that it has achieved, it was not able to contain the spread of terrorism. I mean, it's arguable, and even the GTI report has demonstrated that the Sahel region is more or less the epicenter of terrorism across the world. And so if that is the case, the simple conclusion is that Operation Barkhane has not been a success. But then again, like I mentioned earlier on, it's not as simple as that, in the sense that the initial objective of Operation Barkhane was achieved, which is to prevent terrorist groups
from taking over the capital,
from taking over Mali.
Bamako.
And that was achieved. So if they withdraw now, yes, they're going to create a gap, but we have to situate that gap within the context of their failure to achieve the mission objective, which is to prevent the spread of terrorism. The clear answer to that is that they were not successful in spreading the threat of terrorism. We also have to take into consideration that Operation Barkhane is just one component of the international deployment in places like Mali. The UN mission is there. It has a bigger size than Operation Barkhane. At the last count, it was around 13 million military operatives, and then with about 2,000 police personnel, even though its mandate is very different from the mandate of Operation Barkhane. But it's important to note that already the world has that kind of presence in Mali. And so it's very easy, without the coup and the actions of the military junta, to change the operational mandate of that mission to include perhaps issues that would address the gap that will be created by the withdrawal of Mali. And then, of course, the second point is that Mali is not leaving the Sahel. All it's doing is withdrawing from, France is not leaving the Sahel. It's withdrawing from Mali. It's going to be situated in a neighboring country, which is Niger. And from what we've had, in an attempt to implement the same objectives that it wasn't able to implement in Mali. So the question is, and that's the question that has not been answered by France, what new strategy is it going to introduce that is different from the strategy that it has tried to pursue from 2013 to date when it was deployed in that region? And I think the onus of asking that question and seeking answers is on the African Union, as well as the countries that would host France and its partners, including the EU, in this new mission that they would embark on. Other questions would include what happens to the G5, what happens to the multinational joint task force, given all of this new development. So there are several questions. Unfortunately, the answers are not very clear at the moment.
Very important questions indeed, Dr. Adamu, and we will definitely be monitoring the situation in Mali. Still early days. Now, back to you, Dr. Ojewale. The federal government of Nigeria last year officially declared bandit groups operating in the country as terrorists. The declaration, titled Terrorism Prevention Prescription Order Notice 2021, is contained in Volume 108 of the Federal Republic of Nigeria Official Gazette. You've written quite a lot about banditry in the Northwest, and you also addressed the terminology. Now, how significant is this declaration in addressing banditry and security challenges in Nigeria, Dr. Ojewale?
Well, thank you so much. I think Nigeria's case with banditry is not really so much about the nomenclature. It is providing relevant, state response in addressing this problem that we should be preoccupied with, because whether you put them on the terrorist, you label them terrorists or not. Look, let's be frank with ourselves. Banditry, as it is playing out in Nigeria, is a composite crime. What do I mean by composite crime? Everything that you can imagine. Armed robbery is in it. Kidnapping is in it. Rape is in it. All crime is just loaded into banditry. So are you telling me that we do not have the enabling legislation to address this prior to the labeling of bandits as terrorists?
Dr. Ojewale, sorry to butt in there. Some security experts have said, you know, that labeling allows the military to use a lethal force that might not be permitted against civilian targets, regular civilian targets like armed robbery and all of that. And I mean, its effectiveness is left for debate. It's open for debate.
Well, what I'm just trying to hit,
yes.
Because I mean, like you said, in terms of writing about it, the first thing I wrote about it a long time ago is that what is playing out in the Northwest is it terrorism thinly disguised as banditry, which probably you read about. Yes. So long before it was labeled, I believe what was playing out in the Northwest is terrorism. And what is really, really important is not really making press statement, labeling or no labeling. There is a need to put concerted effort in place to put an end to this. And it speaks to the issues that Dr. Adamu raised, the issue that I raised earlier. The entire country is just engulfed in crisis now. And then as you are stamping out one in one place, another one is coming up in another place. So it's important that the government address the broader issues of security governance, particularly as we move towards the 2023 election. I'm expecting that anybody that is coming out to say you want to lead Nigeria, those are the things that should be on the front burner. Now, if you look at the if you look at the sequence of events after the labeling of bandits as terrorists, so in the public assessment, has it gone down? If it has gone down, fine. Has it remained the same or it has shot up again? Those are the things that I think is very, very important for the people. The kidnapping, the payment for ransom, what is the state of things with respect to that now? You just mentioned what happened in Kebbi State. So the labeling,
has it changed the situation on ground?
Now, that is what Nigerians are much more interested in.
Okay, Dr. Ojewale, I wouldn't be doing justice to this subject if I don't talk about those that are feeling the impact of this terrorism in the Northwest and in the north of Nigeria. What are the humanitarian consequences of this banditry in the Northwest and its impact on women and children, most especially?
Look, we have, this is something that I think is very, very germane to this conversation. Because if you look at the security challenges in Nigeria, you have to look at it and plan with respect to 2, 3, 4, 5 years and have a scenario mapping of what can play out. So one of the critical areas that banditry is affected in the Northwest now is education of the young children. Some children cannot go to school again. What is the implication of that 2, 3 years down the line if these people are disenfranchised from going to school? Those are the things that I think government need to critically look into addressing, because we talk about a country that has about 30 million children on the streets.
The largest in the world.
So 30 million is more than the size of Portugal. It's more than the size of Belgium. Just imagine that entire Portugal of 10 million persons. I mean, you have people who have no access to quality education, who have no access to basic social amenities. These are the context in which I think we need to begin to look at the challenges. Women have been largely affected, children have been largely affected. And in terms of policy response, it's important that this thing, like you are doing, which must, be given the necessary accolade, escalating this to local and global audience so that the people can know the plight of what we're talking about here. We're talking about everybody's talking about the Russia war in Ukraine now. You're talking about, almost half population of Ukraine being on the streets. That is the implication of these 30 million Almajiri kids that are on the streets. And there are evidence abound, particularly in the Northeast, that they become vulnerable, they become susceptible to recruitment by this armed group, by these criminal groups. So the impact of banditry has been largely felt in that region. And don't also forget, we also need to connect this. The entire Northwest represents the granary region for Nigeria. That is where you're having the maize, you're having the tomato and what have you. The impact on food security, if the farmers could not go to farm, is going to be felt in the next 2 to 3 years because they have to take it to something else. So these are the broader issues. And I think areas where these things are affecting us, it's important that the government place close attention in those areas. Your Northwest is a significant part of Nigeria. That is where you have the military complex in Kaduna State. Not far from that, you have the Air Force Base in Kano. These are critical. This is a region that has critical infrastructure of security, public administration.
And even food security too, like you mentioned, yes.
And the food security that I mentioned, it's very, very important. That is where the tomato is coming to the south. That is where the rice is coming, the maize, the corn, everything is coming. So it's important that the government begin to address this thing from policy response. And I think now that we are now going into 2023, I cannot but tie this to political outcome of 2023. Nigerians need to be sensitized that it cannot be business as usual. If anybody is coming out to contest for president, we need to know the plan, the manifesto, the actions that are going to be implemented when the person gets to the office. It's very, very important now. And let me anchor on this. We can't talk about the broader security challenges in Nigeria without touching on security sector reform. And at the center of this security sector reform should be the police itself. Most of the challenges that we're facing in Nigeria are internal security challenges. Of course, I'm not oblivious of the fact that conventional warfare has changed from what it used to look like to modern, it has morphed, and then you now have asymmetric warfare, whereby the enemy is within the people that you are meant to protect. So bearing that in mind, it is very, very important that we begin to think about resourcing and capacitating the police is very, very important. Dr. Adamu talked about the U.S. operation in Mali, 2,000 police. What does that mean? It means that police must definitely be an integral part of these
peacekeeping operations.
This military operation, because it's an internal security issue. And I must tell you, personally, as a citizen of Nigeria, I don't think the government is doing enough in terms of reforming the police to be able to confront this. This is a frank conversation that we must have. What we're dealing with, the military cannot deal with it alone. That is not what the military is trained to do. So you have to bring up the police to the level that at least they'll be able to take some burden away from the military. I think that should be what should dominate the security manifesto of leaders come 2023. And of course, I know this one that I want to say, as the largely polarized in terms of perspective, we have to also look at the direction of state police. It is very, very important.
Okay.
I know it has a lot of details, a lot of...
it's a conversation on its own.
In the larger conversation about security sector reform in Nigeria, in the larger conversation about devolution of power, devolution of policing power must be part of the solution.
It should be decentralized
to address this challenge.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ojewale, for sketching us a solution out of the conflict in the northern part of the country. Now, I would like to come to you, Dr. Adamu, still talking about the Sahel. France was averse and is still averse to negotiations with insurgents in Mali. Is there a way the conflict could end through a negotiated settlement? And can you please just sketch us, I know you don't have a crystal ball in front of you, but what are the necessary steps that the Malian government needs to take to bring about lasting peace in that country?
To emphasize the point I made earlier on, that France has been deployed in the Sahel from 2013 till date, and it hasn't achieved its mandate, at least the stated mandate. Perhaps there is an unstated mandate that it has achieved, we don't know. So if it will be foolhardy to continue a process that has not been successful. Now, what is that process? The process all along has been military offensive. And so the current military government in Mali has indicated that it would engage in some form of conversation with at least some components of the groups that are both terrorist groups and the other militant groups that are in northern and central Mali. Now, even the Nigerian government, where France is relocating to, has indicated that it would open an avenue for discussion. The Nigerian government, where we know that the two major groups, including IFWAP, is active, has also indicated that it's discussing with this government. So the reality is that the African governments appear to be focused on continuing this two-pronged approach, what in local parlance they call the kinetic and non-kinetic approach. So for me, that's the way to go. Continue the military offensive, but also open avenues for these non-kinetic components. But beyond that, I believe there should be a third component, and that third component is centered around improving governance, especially good governance, that would help provide the various avenues for reducing all of the structural challenges that exist within African countries, especially this high level of poverty, illiteracy, name them, that affect local populations and allow them to be influenced by terrorist groups.
Very important. I'd like to say a very big thank you to you both, Dr. Kabiru Adamu, joining us live from Abuja, and Dr. Wole Ojewale from Dakar, Senegal. I did appreciate your insights and contributions to the program. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
You're watching Secure the Continent and News Central Television. We'll go on a quick break, and we're still looking at the Global Terrorism Index 22 with our focus on Africa. When we return from the break, we'll be talking about Congo. Congo has been in the headlines for quite a number of months now. We'll make more sense of the report with relations to the Democratic Republic of Congo. Do stay with us. Thank you for staying with us. If you're just tuning in, this is Secure the Continent and News Central Television. And we have been discussing the Global Terrorism Index in Africa. We have touched on some of the issues in the Sub-Saharan region as well as the Sahel. And we had Dr. Wole Ojewale, a security analyst and expert on conflicts, organized crimes and security governance in West Africa, to aid these conversations. Now, joining me in this second half of the program to zone in on the Democratic Republic of Congo is Kambale Musavuli, one of the leading political and cultural voices in the DRC. He is a human rights advocate and national spokesperson for the Center for Research in Congo, Kinshasa. Thank you very much for joining us, Kambale.
Thank you for having me.
Now, Kambale, just last week, at least 20 civilians were killed in an attack in eastern Congo, and that was blamed on the Allied Democratic Forces. There seems to be little or no international attention paid to it. Is this because of the frequency of attacks in the DRC? Because the DRC seems to be in a state of constant conflict. What is really going on in the Congo?
The conflict in DRC directly tied to its mineral wealth. Since 1996, the Congo has known war. It hasn't stopped. Some believe that the war ended when peace accord was signed in 2003. As you look at the Congos from 1996 to present, we all know that over 6 million Congolese have died in the conflict. And there was a study by the International Rescue Committee that looked at the conflict there, raising the number to about 6 million. Specifically about the latest conflict, the latest killings in the eastern part of the DRC, that is tied to rebel forces that they call ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces. These are concentrated in a very particular area. It's concentrated in an area that's rich of oil. At the time where civilians are being killed, civilians are being displaced, we're seeing a lot of negotiations taking place at the same exact time, right beside where the conflict is taking place. specifically where we have the Lake Albert. It's estimated that Lake Albert has 2.5 billion barrels of oil. The geologists are not being killed. The people extracting the oil are not being killed, but civilians who live right around this area are being killed. But let's focus now on what the global community, I'll say specifically the United States, has said, that these rebels are tied to terrorist groups such as ISIS, right? So when you hear ADF, you hear ISIS at the same time. This information is false. Why am I saying that with a strong voice? Is when you look at the conflict in the Congo, you look at people who research this conflict, particularly the UN group of experts. They've written over 3 reports in the past 3 years where they clearly say that there is no direct link between the rebels in the DRC called the ADF and with ISIS.
Now, talking about the ADF, which seems to be the poster boy, there are more than 100 armed groups operating in the DRC, but the ADF seems to be one of the biggest actors. Last year, the United States Department of State designated the Allied Democratic Forces and the DRC as a terrorist organization. Who are the ADF and what are they fighting for? And does this designation, if anything, does it change anything on the ground?
Okay. I mean, Congo is known for so many acronyms for rebels. I mean, if you start looking, you have hundreds of militia groups with different names. As I laid out in the beginning, the conflict in the Congo is waged toward the resources. But specific for your question, the Allied Democratic Forces are Ugandan rebels who've been operating in the Congo since 1996. They have claimed that's really around the political issues in Uganda. So when I'm saying Uganda, to give a picture of the DRC, Congo borders the Uganda in the east. So these rebels are not in Uganda, they are committing crimes in the Congo. They are not moving beyond where they are. They are killing civilians. And documentation has really shown that their focus has been displacing of the population. I use an anecdote. I was just in DRC in February doing an investigation in the conflict. I met some of the human rights activists when I was there. One of the anecdotes they shared with me is that if the ADF are Islamist terrorists tied to ISIS, Congo will be known as the first place where Islamic terrorists are attacking civilians and stealing their pigs. So it made me laugh even when I was talking to the activists for that. But now the US has designated them as a terrorist group. What does that actually do? It allows the US to have a pretext to bring US military. So you will see that since the designation, US Special Forces have been in DRC. You see since the designation, you have Kenyan peacekeeping forces coming to the DRC. There's been a pledge from Kenya. Ugandan military forces have also entered the Congo. They're actually operating and launching military operations against the ADF. You have the Rwandan forces. So there is a huge militarization of the area where the oil is, but yet peace is still elusive.
Now, I'm happy you mentioned the fact that these foreign countries have a presence in the Congo. Last year, just recently, Congolese President Félix Tshisekedi declared a state of siege in the provinces of Ituri and North Kivu, troubled by violence. Command groups and neighboring countries in the Congolese, Uganda to be specific, began joint operations against the ADF. How has this state of siege fared? It's been several months now, so you can look at the results. And how is the operation, the ongoing joint operation with the Congolese army and the Ugandan People's UPDF, Defense Forces, going?
The Congolese constitution gives the president the power to call for a state of siege. And the constitution is clear about how long it should be. It's about 30 to 45 days that we can have a state of siege in the DRC. It's been months since it's been announced. I mean, it was last year that it was announced, and so far, the killing hasn't stopped. So we know that it's not effective. The different militia groups in the DRC have very different particular interests, but if we don't look at the conflict in the Congo from the root cause of the conflict, we continue to talk today about ADF. Tomorrow, there may be another acronym of a rebel militia. that the conflict in the Congo is being waged for access to Congo's resources. This war started in 1996, waged by Congo's neighbors, Rwanda and Uganda. And if you look at just this year, in 2021, the International Court of Justice did find Uganda liable of crimes against humanity and war crimes in the DRC, and awarded the DRC $300 million for reparation for the crimes. So all those solutions about militarizing the area, going after rebel militias, while peace is still elusive. You just mentioned at the beginning that there were killings in the eastern part of the country, again, of dozens of people. So that's not going to stop until we resolve the question of justice for the DRC. And that question of justice can only be brought about if the crimes of the past are actually tried.
Now, Kambale, I'm happy that you mentioned that Congo's minerals get caught up in all this conflict, and it's one of the drivers of armed conflict in the DRC. Now, I want to ask you this question. Why is Katanga province peaceful? It's mineral rich. Why doesn't this violence spread to Katanga? What have they been able to do differently? And should the rest of Congo, Eastern DRC, adopt the Katanga solution?
Yeah, the Katanga province has known also the crisis, the same crisis. If you look, for example, a couple of years ago, I'll say actually maybe 4 years ago, there was a militia group called Makata Katanga that destabilized the area. We can even look in the center of the DRC, in the Kasai region. 4 years ago, there was a whole uprising that displaced up to 1.2 million Congolese in the Kasai, which was in the center. In the east, it's been prominent. So what's the connection between the Katanga province, the Kasai region that I've spoken about, and also in the east? All three provinces have mineral resources. So we have episodic attacks in different parts of the region where there is no strong state presence, but it comes from a historical course that we have to look at. You know, we can look at the Makata Katanga crisis in the Katanga province as a silo issue. Or look at what's happening in the Kasai. Or look at what's happening in Benin, in a silo. We have to say, what is happening to a country the size of Western Europe, the DRC, endowed with mineral wealth of $24 trillion, a country that's so essential to modern day technology. It's cobalt is used in your electric vehicle and hybrid cars. It's coltan is used in your cell phone. The 2.5 billion barrels of oil has been literally given to Total, the French company. And then you start noticing that the crimes that we are talking, the killings that we are talking about are always happening side by side. But how do we bring about peace and stability in the DRC? Now,
talking about peace and stability in the DRC, just before we wrap things up, the United Nations, the 23-year-old United Nations Stabilization Mission in the DRC was charged with monitoring the peace deals that ended the 1998-2003 war with an annual budget of nearly $1.4 billion and some 19,000 troops. MONUSCO is the largest United Nations peacekeeping operation in the world, and they haven't been able to bring about lasting peace to the DRC. In wrapping up the conversation, because we're fast running out of time, how can the Congo, because it means a lot to you, you're Congolese, and you've been in the forefront of Congolese advocacy for years, how can your country come out of the situation where many have seen it as a failing or failed state? What strategies can lead to lasting peace, especially in the Eastern DRC?
Two things I would say. The first one is the framework of the United Nations. In 2010, the United Nations Human Rights Office published a report, a 545-page report, calling what's happening in the Congo war crimes, crimes against humanity, and possible genocide if proven in a competent court. They proposed some solutions that the Congolese people support. One of the solutions that they proposed was the creation of the International Tribunal for Congo, just as it was done for Yugoslavia and Rwanda, so that the crimes that have been taking place are tried. Because they believe that if you do so, it will send a signal for those who are committing crimes today that we are taking the crime seriously. That's one. The second one, which is much more important, Congo's conflict is not a Congolese problem. It's not an African problem, it's a world problem. If we look at Kwame Nkrumah, when he was thinking about the United States of Africa, he clearly stated in his plan that the capital of the United States of Africa was Kinshasa. And he saw the Congo as the engine for development of the African continent because of its wealth. So as long as Congo, the second largest African country on the continent, is not at peace, bordered by 9 African countries, it's the only country on the African continent with land-border domination. Until it becomes stable, Africa will not be able to advance. So we have to have someone in Lagos saying, I'm hearing this crisis in Congo. It sounds similar to what's happening in the Niger Delta, but the solution is also local for us. What does that look like? Just as we fought to end apartheid, where African people and people around the world came together to put pressure on the South African government to change its course and end the apartheid regime, the same as to happen for the DRC. The Congo movement of today is as important as the first South Africa movement was yesterday. Put pressure on Congo's neighbors to be stakeholder at peace, specifically Rwanda and Uganda. Make sure in your countries you put in pressure that Congo's issues are actually at the forefront, because we know today with the crisis in Ukraine that we are human beings anywhere, and that we must make African issues as important as what's happening in Ukraine and what happened with the first South African movement yesterday.
Thank you very much for your time and contributions to the program, Kambale, Musavuli. We also pray for a time when long-lasting peace returns to the DRC. Thank you. That regional cooperation is seen between Mozambique and the Southern African Development Community is of utmost importance. Transfer of ideas and personnel are also necessary. ECOWAS should adopt this for the West African Sahel. The biggest solution to insecurity is the provision of jobs and a source of livelihood. More jobs should be provided. And until next time, remember to stay safe. I'm Gbenga Aborowa. Thank you for watching Secure the Continent. See you next time.